Hello and welcome to Perpetual Parenting. This podcast is facilitated by Life Fellowship Foursquare Church in Fort Morgan, Colorado. It comes from a series of messages shared by Pastor Derek Brown in 2024. Virtually everyone is parenting someone. Your own children, your grown children, your grandchildren, your aging parents, your coworkers, yourself. People aren't perfect, therefore parents aren't perfect, and we often find ourselves catch-up parenting. It's a perpetual process. In part 2, the number one priority, in this entry to our discussion, we ask the question, are you leading your children or are your children leading you? A good friend of ours likes to say, more is caught than taught. It's important that our behavior leads those around us towards Jesus and towards good choices. So whether you're a new parent, a seasoned parent, or just someone who's surrounded by immature adult kids, dig in as we learn how to serve them all better through perpetual parenting.
All right, so we are doing a parenting series, but and it is for the parents. It is for people who have children in their possession, I guess, currently. But it's also, I've always kind of struggled with parenting stuff because when I was a kid, parenting discussion didn't apply. When I'm a grandparent, it might not apply. When I was a young person and didn't have my own children yet, but I was an adult, I didn't have children, it didn't matter. So while we're having this conversation, I'm trying to have it in such a way that everyone can benefit. And the quick way for that is to just understand that we're all parenting someone. Always. It's going to be your kids, it's going to be your nieces and nephews, it's going to be your grandkids. If not them, it's going to be the young coworkers, the young people that you work with. It might be people that you just run into at the store from time to time, and you have like a moment of being able to influence and guide this young person. But for some of us, it might be that we have parents or grandparents or adults that we work with or other adults in our lives that maybe did not have a good childhood, that did not have the childhood that allowed them to grow up and fully mature. So perhaps we're dealing with adults that behave as teenagers and as young people, and if we understand that they're emotionally stunted because of the way that they grew up, we can treat them and we can guide them in such a way that they can still thrive. Okay, so ultimately this is a discussion about parenting, but hopefully we can see how it applies to all of us in all of our situations and all of the things that we're doing. Okay. I'm going to skip down, Alex. Last week we looked at the parable of the prodigal son as a picture of God's heart for all mankind. Ultimately, we were discussing how we are all God's children, but some of us haven't come to that realization and come home yet. Okay? Is it hot in here for you guys or just me? You guys are comfy? I'm hearing both things, so we'll leave it. I'm hearing hot, I'm hearing cold, so we'll just say, if everybody's miserable, we're happy. That's what we want. If everybody's miserable, then we've compromised appropriately and we can all just be sad. And it's fantastic. Oh, buckle up, guys. I'm not getting better here. Like the snarky side of my head is just, is this my extrovert side acting out from having been in quiet all week? I have an extrovert side. When I lived in Wyoming, it was my primary. Then when we went to South Dakota, and it didn't have to be my primary, it was able to kind of subdue, and then I became more introverted. And now, what is happening to me? All right, so we're all God's children, but not all of us have come home yet, okay? But God's heart is such that the second we start our journey towards Him, He doesn't wait for us to come and grovel. He runs to us. He meets us where we are, and He brings us home. He elevates us and brings us home, okay? So the thing I wanted you to grab from last week's discussion is the difference between the saved and the unsaved is which side of the fence you're on, okay? In the story of the prodigal son, there was the son that stayed home, and there was the son that went away, and the son that came home crossed the fence, okay? So when we look at the world, are they our brothers and sisters in Christ? No, but they are God's children. They were made in His image. They deserve love, gratitude. They deserve honor, okay? And so that discussion started with I found out that people are actually arguing about whether or not people that aren't saved are God's children. They're not brothers and sisters in Christ. They haven't been adopted in that sense. But they are 100% made in God's image. They're 100% his children. His heart is 100% for them. So when we're talking about children and people, and when we talk about God's heart towards his children, his love for humanity supersedes what side of the fence you're on. And the story of the prodigal son illustrates that God's heart, the Father's heart, is for the person that's on the other side of the fence. All right. So this week we're actually beginning the actual parent part of the parenting series. But again, keep in mind, I can't overstate this, you don't have to have children of your own for this to apply, okay? Some of you might even find yourselves healing through this. You might be like, oh, my parents didn't do that for me, so that might have stunted my growth. That might have changed the way that I see the world around me. When I was a kid, because of my relationship with various people, and something I still struggle with to this day is that I understood that love was based on what I could do. And if I could be good enough, then I could be loved. But if I couldn't do good enough, then I couldn't be loved. And so that's part of why I dropped out of high school after the 10th grade. I had failed a class that I was supposed to pass, and my dad had said, my children are never C students. As an adult now, I see that he just meant you're better than that, try hard. I get that. But at the time, my relationship with my dad was such that I failed. I'm not good enough. He can't love me. I'm done trying. And so we all have these kind of moments. And so perhaps through this discussion, you'll be able to see where maybe in your childhood, things weren't exactly what you needed them to be. And you'll be able to kind of buffer that. Or maybe you have grown children and you'll see where, oh man, I didn't do well enough here, or I might have miscommunicated there. And now you may be able to speak to your adult children and bring some healing to them. And my daughter and I had like a 3-hour conversation last week. Most of which isn't important, but one of the things that and I've told you guys this before, but I sat back, I said, baby girl, it doesn't matter how good your parents are. Every child is damaged by their parents. You can't get away from it. It's humanity. The perfect parent is still going to damage you to some degree, and you're going to have to grow up, and you're going to have to work through it. And I told her, again, my American dream is that my kids grow up and be a better person than I am. I don't care if you, like my dad wanted me, my dad's dream was that I would grow up and have a job that would provide for me and provide for him. He's like, you guys got to be doctors and lawyers so that when I'm old, you can take care of me. That was all he ever asked for. That's all he ever wanted. And I think that's pretty solid for that time frame for people that were born in the late 50s, early 60s. That was kind of the American dream, that your children would grow up and be super successful, right? Financially successful. But my dream is just that my kids would be better than me, that they would be more loving than me, more patient than me, more kind than me. That's the line. That's what we're shooting for. And guys, I could have quit a while ago. So my daughter's like, Dad, how come you nitpick us? How come you're constantly picking at the things that we do? I just feel like, I said, Errol, when somebody's first learning to play the piano and they suck because they're learning to play the piano, you work on very broad things. Okay, keep your palms up, use your fingers in this, hold your body in this position. If you learn to hold your body properly, then the notes will get better over time, right? But if you've been playing the piano for 15 years and you have a teacher, that teacher is going to nitpick every note. Say the velocity on that note was not enough. You needed to hit that note harder and that note softer. When you get good at things, if you're going to still grow, nitpicking happens. So my kids are in this place where they feel like, Dad, you're nitpicking us. I said, no, it is my job as your parent to help you grow and become who God has called you to be. And so as you step into new parts of life and as we handle the things that you've dealt with before, we're going to deal with new things. It has to happen. That is my job. None of that's in my notes. Moving forward. So for some of us, understanding that, no, already talked about that. Okay, so today we're looking at the number one priority of a parent, okay? I feel like taking just a quick step here. If you are a parent and we talk about something and you feel like you have completely failed in that area and that it is gone, that the time is over, I screwed it up, it can't be fixed. That's a lie. Our God is a God of restoration. Our God is a God who builds bridges and rebuilds relationships, and there is nothing that he can't do, and there's nothing that he can't do in your relationship with your children, okay? I will talk from time to time about some of the things that my parents maybe did or didn't do that affected the way that I grew up, but you better freaking believe that God covered it. Because God is a God of family, relationships. Okay, all of the years when my dad wasn't able to be a dad for me, I had other dads in there. They didn't call themselves, they're not, Derek, I'm your father figure and you need to do this thing. It would be when I was at my friend's house waiting for him to come home from work and his dad would be there and we would just hang out and chat. Or the day I was out with Pastor Clint's house and he said, Derek, you just need to get a job, dude. And I did, and he was right. It was just this moment where I didn't have a job and he's like, you're bored, get a job. There was the headmaster at my school in college, Gerald Nussbaum. He was a father figure for a time. Then there was Scott Orchard for a time, Brent Parker for a time, okay? I'm always surrounded by people that are filling that gap because God is good. So if you feel like you've failed your children, it's fine because they weren't your children. Just pray that God cover your mistakes and cover the missteps. Because again, it doesn't matter how good of a parent you are. You damaged your kids some. It's a heartbreaking thing to say, but it's reality. It's reality, okay? So, the number one priority of a parent, outside of Christianity, just a general statement, the number one priority of a parent is to gradually transfer a child's dependence from mom and dad to self. For those of you that are filling in notes, I'm going to give you just a quick second to fill that out. Parents' priority is to gradually transfer a child's dependence from mom and dad to self. Now, within Christianity, we're trying to transfer our child's dependence from mom and dad to God, okay? But And I've heard people have this discussion and just kind of leave it there. But the reality is, when my daughter, Xander, Errol, if you're listening to this, right now they're swimming at a hotel, but later they might listen to this. Xander, Errol, if you're listening to this, I'm sorry, but we're going to be talking about you more than usual because you're my guinea pigs. Both of my children started talking very early. I think Xander was probably 10 months old when he started talking. By the time that he was 2, we were having full conversations, full, like deep discussions. He was 2 years old when he climbed into my bed one morning. Okay, he comes up to my bed, and he pushes on me. Dad, can I get in bed? Like, yeah, get in bed, bud. What do you want? I have a question. What's your question, bud? What's a good decision? These are the conversations I was having with my children when they were 2. Okay, at one point when my daughter was maybe 18 months old, I was changing her diaper one day and I said, how many wipes do you think this one's going to take? And she said, 3. I said, I bet I can do it in 2. And it occurred to me, she probably didn't need me wiping her butt anymore. She could probably start potty training. And she did. And see, the thing about Errol, since she was really, really little, Xander, he's distracted. He's running, he's doing things, he's like me in that way. But Errol, when she decides to do something, it's done. So the day she decided that she was going to potty train, she literally did it in like a day. She's like, yeah, I'm done, and I don't want to wear that, so here we go. And it was pretty great to watch. But let's go ahead and look at that next slide. The child dependence chart. This is ultimately kind of what we want to see. Excuse me. We want to see a child at, say, age 1 here on the left. They have virtually no self-dependence. They can't hold their head up. Okay, mom and dad have to hold their head up. We're like the only animal in the animal kingdom that, for the first month of their life, you know? So we start with absolutely zero self-dependence. Then by the age of 2, we're starting to get some stuff. We expect the kid to start maybe cleaning up their room or something. By the time we get up to 3, we're potty trained and they're taking care of themselves in the bathroom and learning to bathe themselves. By 5, they're helping with the dishes. By 10, they're flying rocket ships. That's not accurate. No, but this graph is kind of right, because as our children grow up, we're protecting them, we're guiding them, and then about the time they get to 15, 16, we take this hard curve up into adulthood where our kids are taking on more and more of their life. They're getting a job, they're responsible for getting themselves up and getting themselves to school, they're responsible for doing their own shopping. Their own laundry should have started back at like 6 or 7, but if they haven't by the time they're 17, teach them how to do their laundry. I cannot tell you how important it is to make your children do their own laundry. Not that I ever did it. I'm not allowed to touch the laundry. When Pam and I got married, I would do colors and whites. And she walked in and she looked at the pile and she went, "Do not touch my clothes." So I carefully stepped back, because apparently there are rules for every garment. I said, hey, if I put it in the washer and dryer that first time and it comes out messed up, it wasn't meant to be, and I move on. Anyway, so ultimately our job is not to make our children Christians. Not a popular statement from a pastor, but my job is not to make my children Christians. It is not my job to brainwash my children. It is not my job to groom them into becoming good Christians. That is not my job, because they're not my children. They're God's children. And as I realize that they're God's children, I recognize that my job isn't to force them into a relationship with Jesus. My job is to introduce them to God and give them as many opportunities to meet him as possible. Because ultimately their relationship with God is between him and them. And I've told you guys this before. My children run this show, all right? My kids make church happen, and far more than they probably should. When they grow up and move away, we're gonna need some volunteers to cover. But I told the council when I first came and interviewed with the council, when we first had our first discussion, I said, this is what we do with our children. My kids aren't pastors' kids. I do not expect them to behave as pastors. Too many churches expect the pastors' kids to behave as pastors. My kids are going to make mistakes. They're not always going to be perfect. They're going to say stupid stuff. They're going to be hurtful, because they're children and they should have that space. But what is going to happen is the church is like my farm. And if you grew up in a farm, you know that farm kids get up at 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning, and they go out and they break the ice on the water so the cows can drink, and they start throwing hay. And then they get ready and go to school. Okay, a farm family, your kids get up and they do the job. Your kids might not grow up to be farmers. And that's okay, that's on their own time. But when they're a part of this family, this is what this family does. And that's what my children do. If they grow up and decide not to have a relationship with Jesus, that's between him and them, and I trust that he will cover whatever that situation is, okay? His children, not mine, but his. But in the meantime, sometimes we got to get up and make some coffee, because the cows need to drink, I guess. I don't know, that analogy breaks down at some point. I just called y'all cows. Since you're not paying attention, I have to explain the joke, so it's not funny now. But next time I refer to you as a bovine, please let me know that you're upset about that. Like, throw something. Huh? A friend of mine knows, I know very little about farming, but a friend of mine knows far less. And he was prophesying over someone, and he saw a picture of a cow. And he said, he was prophesying over this guy, and so he sees a picture of a cow, but he doesn't have the language to support what he's seeing. And so he says, "You're a heifer of a man." His wife, who did grow up in farm country, will not let him live it down. And neither will I. All right. So just as my salvation is between me and God, not my parents and me, not my support groups and me, it's between me and God. Same for my children. Proverbs 22:6, one of the main verses for this series. Direct your children onto the right path, and when they are older, they will not leave it. The original word here translates as direct, train, or dedicate. But the overarching picture, Kathy, is it overarching or overarching? Thank you. That's what I thought, but everybody says arching, and so then I have them both rattling around in my head. Arcing, thank you. All right, the overarching tone is that we direct our children, okay? We're directing our children towards God. We're saying, hey, there's a guy that loves you who's better than me. Check it out, okay? So, a parent's priority is to gradually transfer a child's dependence from mom and dad to self. But a Christian parent's priority is also to gradually transfer a child's dependence from mom and dad and self to Jesus. Okay? So I'm going to give you guys just a quick second to write that down because there's a few of you that are like, I have to fill in the blanks or my head will explode. I get it. I go on the rabbit trails because if I don't, my head will explode. That's a reality. Okay, let's go to that next slide. Here we go. So this purple line represents the dependence of a non-Christian on the left and someone who's been with God for a long time on the right. And so when we first meet God, we are 100% self-dependent. And we 100% rely on ourselves. That's what that whole last series was about the human nature versus kingdom nature. Human nature is 100% me. But then as we start to walk with Jesus over those first few years, those first few months even, God starts pulling stuff away and we start to hand him things. And we hand him more and more things. And then as the years kind of roll on, forget the line at the bottom, it doesn't apply in this conversation. But as the years move forward and we spend more and more time walking with Jesus, we're handing over more and we're handing over more and we pull some back and then he's like, hey, give that back to me. Oh yeah, sorry Jesus, here. You said you'd take care of that, and I got selfish and thought I can handle it better than you, but you're God and I'm not. I remember that now. And so we let him take that, and we get more and more dependent on God the longer we walk with him. But we also want to see that in our children, okay? So ideally, as my children are getting self-dependent, they're learning to, take care. You remember when your kids were super little and you had to brush their teeth? And you'd grab them by the head? Dad, stop. Well, do it yourself then. And then eventually they did do it themselves. Thank you. So they brush your own teeth. Great. All I have to do is remember to remind them every day, brush your teeth. Your breath is horrible. So they finally do that. And then pretty soon they're taking care of themselves. So as that is happening, they're becoming self-dependent in the physical human taking care of your self way. We also want to be training them to start to rely on Jesus for the other things. And so this isn't something that just happens, okay? I'm a little bit off the rails here really, really quickly for just a quick second. Dependence on God, you know what? Forget it. Let's just move forward. It'll happen when it happens. We'll talk about it at some point. So how do we achieve this? There's two main points that we'll get to here in just a moment, but the short answer is a Dave McCracken quote, but it's not his quote, but it's one that he repeats all the time. Now he's sweating because Derek has no filter, and Dave often has no filter, so what is Derek about to say? Now, Dave's very, very fond of the phrase, more is caught than taught, or something to that effect. You might say it differently, but that's the gist of it. More is caught than taught. And I actually couldn't find the original person that said this. It's a lot of people say it. I just hadn't heard it until you said it. Yeah, there was a lot of people have said it. And it makes perfect sense, but it's not something that you think about until somebody says it. The best way to lead your family isn't through barking orders, but rather leading by example. And here's the reality. Your kids are going to follow your example anyway. So what is the example you're setting is kind of the question. And so in this conversation with my daughter last week, I said, Errol, I am the best parent I can possibly be for you. I'm miles away from the dad that I grew up with, and he was miles away from the dad that he grew up with. You have the best possible standing on your future that I can possibly give you. And when we have these discussions, it's because I see something in you that maybe I haven't been able to handle in my own life. But if I can, if I can see the thing that I can't, like maybe my propensity for yelling, that comes out from time to time. Maybe that is something that I don't want to see in her. And so I call her out on it. She says, but Dad, you do that. Dad, your behavior isn't matching your words. And so I had this conversation with my daughter. I said, Errol, I'm doing the very best that I can, and this is one of the things that I've not been able to kick yet. But I'm trying to keep you from having to deal with the things that I've had to deal with. So more is caught than taught, but we still have to have conversations. And kids can handle it. I forgot to put this in the notes because I don't know that it applies here, but I want you guys to, this is so important. Every person that ever deals with a child has to understand your children in general, in any setting, will rise to your expectations 100% of the time. Children will rise to your expectations. And if your expectations for them are low, their behavior will be not great. Okay? I would have kids come into the group home, into the suspension program when I worked for Volunteers of America, and their teacher would constantly have problems with this kid. That kid is a problem child. They don't know how to do whatever. They're constantly causing problems. Get that kid out of my class, send him to the suspension program. The kid would come to the suspension program. My expectation is that you follow these very well written out rules. These are the rules. Follow those. Those are my expectations. 90% of the time, the kids would follow my expectations and they would thrive while they were in my program. They would go back to class with a teacher that expected very little of them, and they would rise to the teacher's expectations again. They would get in trouble. They would come back to me. The school would say, why is this kid getting out of your thing? They're not a good kid. They're absolutely a good kid. Your teacher doesn't know how to handle a classroom. Now, if you spend any time in school stuff, for many years, it's getting better now, but for many, many years, teachers were taught to teach their subject. They were not taught how to run a classroom. That is getting better, but when I had kids come in and I said, what happened? Well, the teacher did this, so I did this. Well, the teacher did something stupid, and I can't tell them that. And I can't tell them that this child who is at home is treated as more of an adult than they are in your classroom, and you didn't give them a choice, and they acted out because that's what you do when you feel trapped. Anyway, children will rise to your expectations of them. As a youth pastor, I would tell parents, your kid is amazing. And they would say, what kid are you hanging out with? Because my expectations of them were different, and they would rise to my expectations. And their parents' expectations were lower, and so they would rise to those. Okay? Get that. There are so many troubled kids, struggling kids that have thrived with me because I expect them to win. I expect them to be victorious in life. And they learn to walk in that. All right. So, more is caught than taught applies not only to the spirituality of your home, but everything that you try to teach your children, from eating habits to hygiene, from work ethic to interpersonal relationships. Across the board, your behavior will dictate for your children what they're going to do. One of the things that I have been very, very careful with my children about is healthy eating habits and weight control. Okay? When I was a kid, it was communicated to me that I was fat, that I was overweight. When I was 15, if I had known it at the time, but I didn't, because I couldn't see me properly because I was told that I was overweight. But when I was 15, I was super healthy. Super, super healthy. And then I started lifting weights. I gained a ton of weight. Now I know it was 30 pounds of muscle in 2 months. But then I didn't know that, and there was nobody to communicate that with me. I said, well, if I'm trying so hard to lose weight because I'm so fat, as was communicated to me by various family members, and all I'm doing is gaining weight anyway, why try? So 15-year-old Derek quit trying, and he ballooned up. I'm much smaller now than I was at my heaviest, but it's still something that I deal with. And because food is something that I deal with, and eating healthy and weight control is something that I deal with, I want my children to be more healthy than me, but I also cannot treat them the way that I was treated because it didn't work. So my children are both very, very healthy, even though my behavior, the way that I've lived, hasn't necessarily been healthy. They have seen my struggle, and I've been able to communicate with them and talk to them about my struggle. so that they are more aware of what they're doing and they're paying attention to it. So as they move forward in life, they're not going to have the same struggles that I had because they're not dealing with the brokenness that fed it. Make sense? Okay, 1 Timothy 4, 11 through 12. Teach all of these things and insist that everyone learn them. Don't let anyone think less of you because you are young. Be an example to all believers in what you say, in the way you live, in your love, your faith, and your purity. Okay? Paul is writing to Timothy. And Timothy at this point is a young leader who is struggling to get people to learn from him, okay? They're treating him like a child, even though he was sent by God to teach and train them. So Paul encourages Timothy, if they won't listen to you, if they won't follow your words, let them follow your actions. So parents, if you want your children to stop arguing with you, lead by example, stop arguing with them. My kids stinking hate it so much. Because when I catch that they're going into an argue loop, I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to argue with you. I go into this repeated phrase to just shut them down because it doesn't play. And they're like, oh, Dad, stop it. I'm trying to talk to you. I'm not going to argue with you. Love you too much to argue. Respect you too much to argue. I'm not going to argue. And then they're like, oh, and then we have a real conversation later when they're not trying to argue. If you want your kids to stop shouting at each other, stop shouting at your kids. Okay, your teenagers might not listen to you, but they will see your example. And guys, especially with your teenagers, behavior changes aren't instant. And you have to understand that it takes time for your children to catch on to a concept and change their behavior, especially when they're teenagers. Because you have to remember that a teenager's mind is all chemical, and none of it is balanced. They don't know who they are, where they are, what they're doing today, what they're doing tomorrow. They don't know if they have friends today or tomorrow, or if those friends today are going to be there tomorrow. They have literally nothing solid to stand on. And you're trying to get them to change their behavior, which is another thing that is unstable that now they have to try to balance and figure out. So as a parent, there are some things that we can expect to stop now. When my children are fighting and I say, enough, I expect them to stop. But the discussion about why they're fighting and why they treat each other that way is a discussion that is going to take time. And we have to remember that, okay? One of the big things for parents that I started teaching in the early 2000s when I would do parent workshops is that if your kids are playing video games and you tell them to stop immediately, you are wrecking their world. They have to have time to finish. So your kid, so with Xander, we set up very early. You have an hour a day to play. He knows when his timer is going to go up. He knows when to end his game and be saved by that time. He knows that if he's in a big battle and he's fighting something in a game that takes a long time to beat, that we have grace for that. Because we understand that you cannot just stop the game. We get that. And so because we respect their interests, we're able to create a boundary where in the early 2000s, I don't know if it's such an issue now because we have so much screen time and things are different now, but in the early 2000s, parents were losing their minds with their children because they would say, hey, you've played enough video games today, shut it off. And then their kids would lose it. But the parents didn't realize that their kid had just spent 2 hours trying to accomplish something that if they stopped right then wouldn't save. And I realize that video games aren't real, but to a child, everything is real. Make sense? Again, this is not on my list. I'm just kind of bouncing around. So I told you guys that there are 2 main points to getting that graph, getting our kids to grow up, but also to rely on God. The first one is you need to love your God. We're going to be looking at Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 1 through 10 or something here eventually, 1 through 9. So this is when God is kind of laying out the law, if you will. And he says, these are the commandments, decrees, and regulations that the Lord your God commanded me to teach you. Sorry, this is Moses speaking to Israel, but still it's God, so whatever. These are the commands, decrees, and regulations that the Lord your God commanded me to teach to you. First, you must obey them in the land you are about to enter and occupy, and you and your children and grandchildren must fear the Lord your God as long as you live. If you obey all his decrees and commandments, you will enjoy a long life. Listen closely, Israel, and be careful to obey. Then all will go well with you, and you will have many children in the land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord your God, the God of your ancestors, promised you. Continuing. Old Testament is rough sometimes. But all this is important. Listen, O Israel, the Lord is your God, the Lord alone. And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. And you must commit yourselves wholeheartedly to these commands that I am giving you today. Okay, you want to teach your kids? You want to teach your kids to be reliant on God? It starts with your behavior. I forgot to put this on a slide. I'm super sorry about that, but I've got some statistics here. Kids who become active Christ followers as adults. If mom and dad went to church, if mom and dad both went to church, 72% of kids will go to church as adults. If only mom went to church, 15% of kids will go to church as an adult. If only dad went to church, 55% of kids will go to church as adults. That shouts about the perception of children and their parents. And part of that is because there's a subconscious understanding or belief that mom does it because she has to, dad does it because he wants to. Now, dads, we know as being dads that there's a lot of stuff we don't want to do. We get up, we go to work, we sacrifice our time, energy, whatever for the family. But when we're home, because we spend all this time at work, usually when we're home, we just kind of do whatever we want. Sometimes we help clean and sometimes we clean stuff up, but or do chores around the house or whatever. But by and large, men, when we're at home, we're not doing much. So kids see that if mom is doing it, it's because she has to, and I don't want to have to. But if dad is doing it, it's because he wants to. If dad wants to, then I want to, because that seems like fun. Now, there's also this separation between the mom job and the dad job, where the dad job is, I'm not going to say primarily, but two things that a dad is supposed to teach. And again, we have all kinds of different family situations, divorce steps, all the different stuff. So ultimately, like in a general situation, parent discussion, a dad would generally teach a work ethic and a play ethic. A work ethic and a play ethic. And we actually see that in the animal kingdom as well, especially like if you look at lions. Mom will eat you. Dad will hang out. Did you guys see the video of the baby lion that grabs a hold of dad? Like, "Arr!" And the dad goes, "Ah!" Like it's the worst thing ever. Like he's teaching his little lion to be, anyway, it's fun. All right. If neither mom or dad go to church, 6% of kids will go to church as adults, okay? But all of that is to say, if you want your kids to love God, you need to be loving God. If you want your kids to have a relationship with God, you need to show them your relationship with God. You're not going to hide anything from them anyway. Kids are super smart and your walls are way thinner than you think they are. The kids know what's going on. Have some conversations with them. Okay, if I want my kids to have a healthy marriage relationship when they grow up, it's important that I lead now by having a marriage relationship with my wife that is one that shows them what a marriage can be. See, when I was growing up, I didn't have that. I didn't have a marriage relationship to look at. My parents would fight 50% of the time they were together. At least that's what it seemed like when I was a kid. Probably less than that in reality, but when you're a kid, everything's different. But I had Clint and Becky Pickrell, my best friend Ryan's parents. And I got to see what it was like for a husband and wife to love each other, to play, to have adventures, to spend time together, to actually live like a single unit. And I got to experience that because I would go and spend the night at their house and I would see how their dad behaved when he wasn't working and when he wasn't preaching. And a lot of who I am actually comes from watching those guys. A lot of what you guys hear comes from those guys. Clint's a rancher too, though. That makes sense. All right, where am I here? All right, so first one, you want your kids to be close to God, do that. Second is lead your family, okay? Now this it seems redundant, But there's a difference between me passively letting my kids see my behavior and actively letting my kids see my behavior, okay? So when my kids were little and my behavior was not as calm as it is now, again, believe it or not, this is Derek 3.0. All right, you're looking at Derek 3.0. There was a major change that happened in me around the time that Pam and I moved here, and the Derek that lived in South Dakota no longer exists. All right, he shed his skin and is a new creature. I'm like a freaking butterfly out here, and yeah, flying stuff. But Derek 2.0, well, Derek 1.0 was a mess. Then he went to college, became Derek 2.0. Derek 2.0 did really, really well, but he had a lot of anger issues, and he was very loud, very aggressive, very hurtful in a lot of ways to different people. And so when my kids were little, when they were 0 to 10-ish, that's the dad they had. And one of the things that I did that I think was right, I don't know, time will tell if it works out for sure, but I would tell them, I realize I'm not making all the right choices, but I'm trying to be better. Watch me as I try to be better. So instead of passively letting my children see my behavior, I'm actively telling them, I am trying to change this behavior. Watch me and call me on it. There are some behaviors you can ask your children to call you on. You can be partners in this, especially as they start getting older. Oh my gosh, you want to give your kids a sense of purpose? Share your struggles with them when they're teenagers and ask them their opinions. And then actually listen to their opinion. Don't tell them why it's wrong, but listen to their thoughts on the matter. Because your kids see the world in a completely different way than you do. The kids at your job see the world in a completely different way than you do. You have a young person that you're working with that is like struggling to be part of the team. Ask them their opinion on a subject. Okay? Maybe Matt McCracken is working with this young mechanic guy. And he was telling me a story about how they had to fix this light on a trailer. And the kid got it apart, and he hadn't done it before, and he hadn't seen one before, and so he got it apart, and Matt was kind of watching him. And the kid put it together wrong, and Matt just kind of let him. And then after a minute, Matt goes, so how are you going to do that? How are you going to put that last piece in? And the kid went, So Matt did what a lot of us do in a training situation, and he laughed and he walked away and let the kid learn his lesson. But he's having conversations with this kid about work ethic, and Matt's actually having conversations with a lot of people about work ethic right now because Matt's work ethic is like up here, and he needs his people to be up here, but some of them are not there. So he's leading by example, but he's not just leading by example, he's telling them, this is what I am doing, and this is what I expect. This is the example I'm setting for you. He's pointing out the example, okay? Deuteronomy 6:7-9, we'll continue that little portion of the discussion there. Repeat them again and again. So this is all the things that God, all the guiding rules, whatever that God left for Israel. Repeat them again and again to your children. Talk about them when you're at home and when you're on the road, when you're going to bed and when you're getting up. Tie them to your hands and wear them on your forehead as reminders. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. See, when I was a kid, my dad would tell me to make better decisions. But that was all he ever said. I remember this one time we had been on a bike ride. We were going home, and there was a shortcut into my neighborhood that had a little, like a razor wire, not razor wire. Come on, what's barbed wire? Thank you. Words. It's a simple word. I should know the word barb. So it was a little barbed wire gate that was super loose that everybody, including my dad, would just cut under it and walk home. So we're on our way home. I'm ahead of my dad and my sister, and I cut across the street to throw my bike under the fence, jump over it, and take the shortcut home. And my dad just shouts, "Hey, it's a bad choice. Make a better choice." That's all he said. And I couldn't have conversations with my dad. But to me, that was the better choice. That was the right choice. We're going home. This is the quick way home. We just did a 14-mile bike ride. We're exhausted. Everybody does this, including Dad. Let's just take the shortcut. Everybody takes the shortcut. Now that shortcut is actually a road. They opened it up and it's actually a road now. But all my dad said was make better choices. But when Xander was 2 and he crawled into my bed and said, Dad, what's a good choice? I didn't just say, well, that's when you do what I tell you. I said, Xander, everything is a choice, and there's always going to be something in front of you every moment. Do I turn left here? Do I turn right there? Do I eat out today? Do I eat at home today? Do I get up on time? Do I hit the snooze button? Do I keep pacing right now, or do I stand still? These are all these are all decisions that are being made all the time. And a good decision is one that you think about and don't just act on. So again, we're leading our kids by our actions. We're leading the young people that we interact with by our actions, but we also need to be having conversations with them. We need to be pointing things out. My kids are probably never going to say decision in their adult life. They're going to avoid that word like the plague because dad overused it. But the principle is there, and they will teach the principle to their children and whatever children that they end up working with, because I didn't just show them, we talked about it. So you guys get that, right? Like leading by example is primary, is number one, but actively leading by example means having conversations about that. Pam grew up in a house where nobody talked. And so when we got married, it was weird for her to have a disagreement and then discuss it rather than just one person be right and the other person be sad, you know? And so we had to work through this situation as a couple where we had to learn to fight. And so now when I do get to do premarital counseling, I try to teach them to fight. I try to get them mad at each other. I do. I'm like, okay, so what have you ever done to make that one mad? Oh, well, one time I did this thing to make them mad. I said, oh, yeah, that made you mad, huh? Well, I thought that sounds like that was probably the right thing for them to do. I don't know why you're mad about it. And you just let them go. Because we got to learn to fight. It's so important that we learn to fight and that we learn to fight fair. But our children can handle so much more than we think and so much more than we want to put on them. Not to say that there isn't age-appropriate stuff. There is. But as they get older, as they get into the preteen and teen years, there's so much more that we can be talking to them about that'll be helping them become, that will help them become the adults we want them to be. Pam is really, really good at numbers, really, really good at books, really good at finances, partially because her dad put her in charge of the finances when she was 17. They were on a missions trip in El Salvador. They lived there for 13 months or something like that. And the entire time they were on the missions trip, her dad said, Errol's my daughter. Pam is Doug's daughter. Doug says, Pam, here's the books. Have fun with that. And then he walked her through it and he talked her through it and she learned how to do all these things. And our taxes are done by February every year. Because she does them, because she's comfortable with it, because when she was a child, her dad influenced her and showed her how to do things and walked her through it. We can do these things with our kids. So, closing now, and the biggest challenge with leading your children by our own behavior is when our behavior is wrong. When our behavior is wrong, we must first accept our wrongness. My children have heard me apologize. I never heard my dad apologize. Because dad was never wrong. But because of that, I grew up, I became an adult, and when I was deciding what kind of parent I wanted to be, I want to be a parent that's wrong. Because my kids are going to be kids that are wrong, and they need to know how to deal with it. So we need to accept our wrongness. Then we need to be willing to change our behavior. As parents, as leaders of young people, we need to accept our wrongness and we need to change our behavior. It is so hard for people from my generation and before to do that because it was never ever modeled for us. And accepting wrongness, apologizing, especially for a father figure, was unheard of because that was weakness. Right? but it's not weakness. It's setting your kids up to win, is what it is. So we accept our wrongness, we change our behavior, and we need to make amends. It is not enough to feel bad and to understand that we messed up, but our behavior needs to change, and we should be talking to the young people about what we did wrong. Okay? Sometimes when I shout at my kids, it is because that is the best way for me to parent them in the moment. But there have been times in their lives when I lost my temper and was out of control. And you better believe that I apologized to them and we talked about it. Because I had a lifetime of that behavior that I was trying to fix. And so they got to see Dad dealing with a struggle. And they got to see Dad working through it. And they got to see Dad come out on the other side and become a better person.